Professor Chomsky, in recent weeks we've seen fighting break out within the occupied territories, Hamas and Fatah, including some gun battles in the streets. And I'd like to hear your take on that, and I'd like to know what that means for the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Well, it's a serious internal conflict. It's not the major issue there, far from the major issue. The most important events that are taking place in the occupied territories are the U.S.-Israeli programs, which are not rhetoric. They're being implemented, programs of annexing the valuable land and the primary resources, including the crucial water resources, breaking up what remains of the West Bank into unviable, pretty much disconnected cantons with big infrastructure projects and the wall and so on, and imprisoning the remnants, totally surrounding them with Israeli-occupied territory. Well, that's really serious. If those U.S.-Israeli programs are implemented, it's the end of Palestine. And that's the major issue that we should be concerned with. That is described in the United States. Almost universally, it's described as a courageous program of withdrawal. It's not a courageous program of withdrawal. It's an outrageous program of annexation, and perhaps the most extreme program that has certainly been implemented or even contemplated. That's really serious. There are internal problems within Palestinian society right now, mainly in Gaza. Gaza has been turned by the occupation into an utter hellhole. It's the main reason why Israel pulled out its few thousand settlers. And it's almost unviable. I mean, it's completely surrounded, has no control of its territories. There's huge poverty and unemployment. And there's a big split between the old Fatah and the new Hamas. And yes, it's showing up in military confrontation. We should be asking ourselves, what can we do about it? I mean, I'm not giving advice to the Palestinians. What can we do about it? Well, we can relieve the circumstances in which these confrontations are taking place. I mean, for example, right now, the United States, primarily, Israel too, of course, and to an extent the European Union, are carrying out a really vicious program of trying to starve the Palestinians into submission because they voted in a free election in a way that we don't like. I mean, that should be arousing a storm of protest. Well, we can relieve that and help create circumstances in which maybe their existence will be viable. Now, that's not going to end the internal conflict among the Palestinians, but it would mitigate it. And that's a step that can be taken and should be taken quite apart from the conflict.
Mr. Chomsky, you seem to talk a lot about international law in this book and in other books. There's a Security Council resolution 1559 on Lebanon, which calls on all militias to be disarmed. You recently visited Hezbollah. Can you tell us what you think of Hezbollah in that light, and does it violate the Security Council resolution and international law? And can you tell us what your thoughts about Hezbollah?
Hezbollah doesn't violate it, but the government of Lebanon does. The government of Lebanon has been unwilling to implement that component of the Security Council resolution. Should they implement it? Well, you know, that's up to the Lebanese. Hezbollah is a major political party in Lebanon. In the south, it has allegedly about 80% support, and the rest of the support is mostly to Amal, which has very similar programs. The polls indicate that a majority of the population does not think that they should disarm, but that's for them to decide. It's for the government of Lebanon. It's up for if you think that the government of Lebanon is violating international law, then convince the Security Council to sanction them.
No, they call on all militias to be disarmed.
That's right. Yes, but militias are not responsive to any more than I am. If the Security Council says that, if Security Council passes a resolution saying that I should move to some other part of the city, I don't have to do it. That's up to. No, because an individual doesn't violate international law. International law is imposed on states, okay? And states can observe international law, or, like the United States and Britain and others, it can radically violate international law. It's up to the people of Lebanon and the government of Lebanon to decide whether they want Hezbollah to disarm.
You say that arms of Hezbollah, such as it said in a UN report recently to Iran and Syria, violate international law.
The states might, if you have credible evidence, just as the United States, just as the United States radically violates international law by providing massive arms to. Yeah, I understand what you want. You want to concentrate on some minor footnote in the whole story, and I suggest that we look at the whole story. All right, turning to your minor footnote, yes, which is natural for someone who accepts and adopts and wants to pursue the policies of powerful states. Turning to that minor footnote, whether Hezbollah should disarm is a matter for the people of Lebanon to decide. They have a semi-democratic government, very sectarian, but it's got democratic forms. And if they decide that Hezbollah should disarm, yes, then it should disarm. Why aren't they doing it? Well, there's a reason. You may not want to think about it, but the Lebanese think about it. The reason is that they know very well that a guerrilla formation in southern Lebanon is the only potential deterrent to yet another U.S.-backed Israeli invasion. There have been 4 U.S.-backed Israeli invasions since 1978, violent and brutal ones. They were finally driven out after 22 years of occupying southern Lebanon in violation of Security Council resolutions, and they're driven out by guerrilla warfare. And the remaining potential for guerrilla warfare is the only deterrent for another invasion. Well, should Lebanon decide that they need a deterrent? Yeah, it's up to them to decide. It's up to them to decide. And if they are violating Security Council resolution, then they should be treated exactly the way the U.S. and Israel are treated when they radically violate Security Council resolutions. So, for example, if you really think that Security Council resolution should be enforced, then I'm with you. But let's take the big case. So, for example, let's start with the UN Charter, which makes it which is the foundation of modern international law, and makes it it calls aggressive war the supreme crime. That's the Nuremberg principle, accepted by the United Nations. So aggression is the supreme international crime, gross violation of the UN Charter. So fine, let's, and remember, the supreme international crime encompasses all the evil that follows, right? That's the Nuremberg decision, accepted by the UN. So fine, let's start punishing the serious violators of international law, like the people are sitting in the White House. Yeah, I think international law should be enforced. The major and we can go down for a whole series of other violations. So, for example, I thought the UN resolutions calling for, Security Council resolutions calling for Israel to withdraw from southern Lebanon should have been enforced for 22 years. But they weren't, and I'm sure you didn't care about it, or if you did, let me know. That should have been enforced. They finally did withdraw under guerrilla warfare. The separation wall, which is part of the annexation program of the West Bank, has been declared illegal by a unanimous judgment of the World Court, including the U.S. Justice, contrary to what you may believe. If you read his independent declaration, you'll say that he agrees with that. So that's a unanimous declaration of the World Court. You know, that's binding in international law. That should be enforced. Instead, people like us are helping to violate that law by supporting the annexation program and the U.S. and tacitly European Union support for it. So sure, I would like to see all international law enforced, but if we're going to be serious about it, we don't just take some toothpick on a mountain which happens to conform to power interests in the powerful states and say, okay, let's focus on that. What we do is look at the whole picture, start with the serious cases. Then when we get down to the toothpicks on the mountain, we can pay some attention to them. Also, paying some attention to the reasons why probably a majority of the population in Lebanon thinks they need a deterrent.